In this section, we'll discuss treatment options. Within the hearing community, there are many different treatment options available. This is not always the case within the deaf community. So we'll discuss some approaches you can use when working with your deaf and hard of hearing clients and students. We've already discussed research and prevalence, barriers and assessment issues, and now we'll discuss where you can send a client, what kind of treatment you can use, and what approaches are available. Within the general population, there are many different approaches to treatment. Some are also used within the deaf community. The first is the 12-step or the AA medical model. It's the same program under two different names. Many programs follow the 12-step concept. The next is the harm reduction method. Many of you may be unfamiliar with what this means. This is typically found on a college or a university's campus. The 12-step program is very strict and doesn't allow any use and promotes abstinence, compared to a harm reduction model, which teaches a person how to use with less risk. Perhaps there's an individual who's not ready to quit and not ready to admit that they have a problem. This method would teach them to use substances that were less dangerous or to be more responsible in their use. For example, if they're drinking, not to drive, or if they use drugs, not to use needles. This is typically found on a college campus and can be a good resource for students, and it's good for you all to know about as well. The next is the cognitive behavioral therapy method, and it's used within general counseling, mental health, and substance abuse. Motivational interviewing, I'm sure some of you have seen that and used it within your behavioral health counseling. And the last is therapeutic, which is very strict and has rules, such as an inpatient program. What we know is that 1/2 of people who begin treatment leave before completion. Many people need more than one time in treatment, regardless of whether or not they're deaf or hearing. It's a disease, so it doesn't just go away. So it's very difficult for a person to admit that they need help, that they have a problem, and that they need treatment all at the same time. But we know that those who do complete treatment decrease their use. However, the relapse rate is very high. This is typically true when there are not a lot of resources or support available, or there's not a lot of access to programs. Most deaf individuals don't have complete access to 12-step programs. And as we mentioned, because this is a disease, a person might need multiple times in treatment before they're able to stay on the path to recovery. The first thing we'll discuss today is a mainstream setting. These are designed for hearing people. Some deaf people are placed in these programs and are successful, and others are not. Within the mainstream program, they might provide an interpreter, but it's typically only for 2 hours or so at a time, and so it's not enough. There should be an interpreter available for many more hours than that. As a deaf individual, they should have the right to choose whether they prefer a mainstream program or if they'd like to go to a specialized program. As a deaf professional, I might choose to want to go to a mainstream program because of confidentiality reasons. Or I may prefer to have direct communication and go to a specialized program. But unfortunately, most deaf people don't get the option to choose which program they'd like to go to because there just aren't enough options for treatment. Within the mainstream setting, there are very few trained substance abuse counselors who work with deaf and hard of hearing and who are also fluent in American Sign Language, and the interpreters are only there for part of the time. Staff typically is not knowledgeable about deafness or cultural issues, and the materials are typically in English and not accessible to those who are deaf and hard of hearing with limited reading levels. The rationale behind why we think treatment programs that are specialized are so successful is because of access to communication. Language is the primary deliverance mode to services. They're able to communicate with one another, and language is based on cultural experience. They then have full access to treatment. So if you design a specialized program, what would that look like? It would need to include deaf and hearing counselors who are fluent in American Sign Language, and the staff would need to be knowledgeable about communication and culture. The materials would need to be adapted and accessible, and you would need the appropriate devices such as video phones, flashing lights, or other devices to make everything accessible. Within the Minnesota Chemical Dependency Program, which opened in 1989 and still is operating today, we have served over 1,289 deaf and hard of hearing clients. The standard was really set because of this model and that approach. This program now serves as a good role model for other programs. If they can use this same approach and create programs, hopefully it'll improve treatment conditions for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. In the program, we have dually trained staff. They're trained in general counseling and mental health, and they're also knowledgeable about substance abuse. There's full access to communication, and they have communication assessments. So the staff are able to match the communication style of the client, which alleviates a lot of the stress the client might arrive with because they're able to communicate fluently. The materials are adapted. For example, we use a visual model, which includes the use of drawing and other modalities for the step work and group work with full access to communication. As an example, when a client first arrives to treatment, the staff need to begin by collecting data. They need to figure out what their primary drug of choice has been, what they use, how much they use, and if you have a client who has limited language, how are they supposed to fill out forms like that in a mainstream program? The person might have to write back and forth and answer all of those forms, as compared to a specialized program where a person could act it out or make drawings. For example, when I'm hired drunk, bad things happen to me, how we address that question is having people draw consequences of things that happen to their body, financially, legal, job, school, and social consequences. Each person would draw all these consequences, which would then indicate the bad or negative things that happened when they were high or drunk. They would then share this with their counselor and then with their group. They'd be able to see that other people struggled with the same concept and that they're not alone. You can see this first picture is legal consequences. If you're curious about getting more information about the materials I'm sharing, you can go on the Minnesota program website for more information. I'll show you more pictures a little later. So the first step, when we collect all the information and the data, the person has to admit in step 1 that they're powerless over drugs and alcohol and that their life is unmanageable. It's very difficult to convey what this actually means to a person who has limited language. So we've developed an ASL video that presents step 1 in American Sign Language. They're asked to explain 3 things that they learned and then draw pictures of how their life is unmanageable and how they're powerless over drugs and alcohol. They then share this with counselors and then with their group. You may have one client who's highly educated and another who's never been to school. And taking away this language barrier by using drawings is very effective. Another example is maybe a person will draw how their drug use impacted their family and friends. Here are some picture representations that one person drew. The second picture on the top is a puppet. And this represents how drugs and alcohol controlled their life completely. That picture is very visual and shows what that person has experienced. The other one on the top shows a person who's stuck inside of a glass. There's an entire world outside of that glass, but they're unable to access it or get to it or experience it. They can't communicate, they can't do anything because drugs and alcohol have gotten them stuck into this place. And you can see that these messages are very clear. They're very powerful. This is another picture, which is a great example, that has two ways, whether a person will pick a positive way or a negative way. The positive would be going out with their friends to a movie with no drinking involved, and the negative would be going to the bar and having some drinks. You can see that the person is torn in this situation, and this visual representation tells you much more than what their words might have been able to tell you. So staff and counselors are able to use these drawings to help them understand the concept of the 12-step program. One problem is that there's no evidence-based treatment model at this point for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Remember we discussed earlier about research. For funding, we have to have data. And at this point, because we don't have that, it's very difficult. With the Minnesota Chemical Dependency Program, seeing that these approaches have been successful and that we're evolving these best practice models is positive, but we haven't fully researched and documented the effectiveness of these kind of models yet. And when I talk about best practices, not evidence-based, but best practices, what do I think that should look like? First, the counselors should know about deaf culture and know how to communicate with each client. Their program should be adapted to meet the needs of the individual, and that would be considered best practice. There needs to be ongoing support and networking so that once a person leaves treatment, they know they can go and find help, a 12-step program, or receive support. There also need to be assessments that are normed on the population and materials that are accessible in the client's language of choice. We're seeing more and more use of technology that's provided within the substance abuse services. Online, there are some 12-step meetings that are accessible, many using ASL. I'm going to be discussing another program or model today that's now available for use that uses technology with its clients. The program is called DODA, Deaf, Off, Drugs, and Alcohol. This program started from a federal grant in the state of Ohio and has now expanded to serving people across the United States, providing online 12-step meetings through the use of sign language to meet the needs of each client. Remember when we discussed best practice, treatment and recovery needs to be in American Sign Language and be linguistically appropriate. One example would be a video phone. Years ago, we didn't have such technology as an option. We weren't able to see each other face to face. But now, with video phones or other technology, we can have better service. For example, if I was a deaf person and I felt tempted to use, I would be able to call another person and see them face to face on the video screen. So we'll discuss this program through DODA and how they use this technology. We provide the consumer with online 12-step programs. A person can go to the DODA website to find out times of the 12-step meetings and how to access them. The 12-step meetings are online and available regardless of where you live. There are a number of different meetings offered on a weekly basis, and up to 10 people can participate in each meeting at any given time, and they're fully accessible. And in relation to successful interventions with deaf people, what we mean is first, accessible 12-step meetings, providing interpreters. A lot of places won't do this. Many colleges I've worked with have no 12-step meetings on campus at all. If students need help, they have to go off the college campus to find help. But now with technology, it's providing additional options. We need more education, prevention, and transition programs that will help people understand the reason to avoid substance use and abuse, because many people don't understand the harmful consequences of drugs and alcohol abuse, and they don't understand that it's a disease. So they're uneducated in this information as opposed to their hearing peers. Next, they need to know about accessible inpatient, outpatient, and aftercare services. And it's important to have training opportunities available for professionals about treatment considerations, how to make a referral, and options that are available. There should be additional coursework for professionals and more workshops. They'll help them know what to do if they're working with a person who they suspect might have a problem, and then how to identify that and how to then refer them. The substance abuse counselors need to be fluent in American Sign Language. And I know several deaf individuals who have become certified, but where can they go for support? Their clients go to the same meetings, the same 12-step meetings, and there might not be an interpreter at one meeting that they want to go to, so that deaf professional may be in recovery. But how are they supposed to find resources? Very stressful for them when they need resources and there are none available. So there's more research that needs to be done so we can develop more programs that will be able to help and serve the deaf and hard of hearing individuals who have substance abuse or addiction issues. We have a lot of resources available listed on the website. If you have additional questions or you want more information, go to www.pepnet.org for a list of more information. And I really hope that you have learned some great information today on how to work with your students and clients who might have an addiction problem. Thank you.